Just a few questions in relation to the evidence that you've given us this morning. You make the point in your submission this morning regarding the fact that people starting paying into their pension at a younger age, younger than 23, that it has a significant impact in terms of their outcome and the outturn of that fund. And you said that there are reports to that effect. You might furnish the committee with that evidence, which I think would be useful. Maybe if you could, or your colleagues here, comment on this €20,000 threshold, which is an issue that we've heard contrasting views from witnesses that have come before the committee. The department has made the case, and strongly made the case, that anyone earning less than €20,000, the level of payment from the state contributory pension is sufficient to make up their potential loss in income in terms of the ratio, as is the intention of the auto-enrolment for people over €20,000, and for people on lower incomes having to put additional money aside for a pension contribution when they're trying to pay grocery bills, that the priority should be on supporting them to meet their day-to-day needs. And you might comment on that. If you could also maybe comment on the point that you make regarding part-time working, and I think this is a significant issue in terms of people, usually women, for one reason or another, are not working full-time, or not working full-time at various points in their career, and as a result of that may have an income below the threshold. The hourly rate might be significantly above that, but the annual rate could be below that. And if you could elaborate on the points that you're making in relation to that, and how you think auto-enrolment could be adapted to address that cohort of the population, considering that it is possible for someone to voluntarily go into auto-enrolment, and you would hope that people earning high hourly rates but maybe working short time would contribute to that. You have raised the issue regarding flexibility, particularly in terms of top-ups, and that this is an issue that has come up in evidence on a number of occasions. And just finally then, in your evidence this morning, you talk about the CPA in terms of this idea of it being an actual pension fund making the decisions in relation to investments, and saying that it's unproven structures. But correct me if I'm wrong, if you go across the OECD, two approaches have been taken in general across the OECD. One is where you have an agent of the state gathering the money, and then private pension funds making the investment decisions. Or the alternative model that has been used is where you have a state pension fund doing that investment. So explain to me this unproven structure, because it has been proven, particularly in some of the Nordic countries, of going down this particular road and this particular approach. So if either you or some of your colleagues want to come back on some of those issues.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And I will take the first three parts of that question, and I maybe defer to my colleague Jacqueline Thornton on the model itself. So in terms of the impact of the lower income group, we are looking at other jurisdictions that have introduced an auto-enrolment scheme, and in particular New Zealand and even our near neighbours over in the UK, who have a threshold of €10,000. And we have drawn from their experience. In New Zealand, they actually had a kickstart. They had no threshold, but they actually added $1,000 to the scheme. So they found that that was really necessary in order to get the uptake, because of this lower threshold, this cohort of lower paid workers. And the experience that we are hearing from the UK is that if they had to do this scheme again, they would actually remove that £10,000 threshold and lower it even further, because it does prove to be a barrier to entry to this scheme. And while you make the point about having to divert income to more pressing matters such as grocery shopping and the like, I think many of these lower paid workers, when they can get an opportunity to divert money into a pension scheme, it becomes part and parcel of the net income that they're coming out with. It is a very good practice. These early years when people are on lower incomes are very important because of the effect of compound interest. And so we are drawing our experience on the best in class here, where it is proven that it actually proves a barrier to have such a high threshold of income. It also impacts, as you say, on part-time workers, many who may not ever reach that threshold of 20,000. And that, as you say, are predominantly women in caring roles and working part-time when they can fit it in around family demands. So it is affecting a smaller cohort of the target audience here, but it really is negatively impacting the female cohort in particular. And we believe that addressing it now at the outset of this new auto-enrolment scheme is the best time to do it. Experience from other jurisdictions is that once it becomes made legislation, there's very little appetite from governments, from political parties to go back in again and start to change the rules of a scheme. So we're advocating to get it right first time, to listen to the experience of other jurisdictions, and to address that threshold of income. I think many lower paid workers are younger people, and at that age of less than 23, many of them are still living at home. And this is a good saving scheme. It actually brings them into the practice of putting money aside for their long-term financial well-being. They probably can afford it more than we would estimate because they don't have the demands of a family and of a mortgage and of household bills. They're probably living at home with their parents. So we would see it as actually an opportune time to start a pension scheme, and not something that we should delay until they're much older, in their mid-20s. The unproven model, I think, from my own experience actually as the ex-chief executive of the Road Safety Authority, I just know how complex it is to set up a fully functioning and a competent body, drawing from resources that the financial services sector are already finding difficult to secure. We're already suffering from skilled labour shortage in this sector, and we're starting this structure from scratch, and we will have to build quite a large organisation, I fear, in order to deliver on, I think the Bill 15 sets out almost 20 executive functions for this CPA. But I maybe draw on Jacqueline Thornton there to step in and further elaborate on that one.
Yeah, so I can pick up on the actual structure of the CPA. So you're right, Deputy, there are certainly two approaches that we've seen in jurisdictions around the world. Even in those that utilise the existing pension infrastructure, it takes quite a bit of time to set that up. And you referenced the Nordic structures there in particular. We have seen this in countries such as Sweden. And I think one of the most noticeable points in Sweden was exactly the PPM, I believe it was called, was set up as a fully functioning state body with the administration outsourced. What happened there is the large global infrastructure, the IT provider that was outsourced to, coming up to the deadline, actually couldn't deliver, and the state had to take it back in-house. And the state had to then build from scratch. And again, to Moya's point in terms of resource and time, that simply pushes the deadline out. So it's certainly our contention that looking at the other countries similar to Ireland, such as the UK, for example, utilising existing pension infrastructure is certainly a quicker, easier, and has been more proven to actually deliver. So pension providers have been providing pensions in Ireland for decades. They're quite experienced in providing pensions. They understand how long it takes to tender for these types of contracts, and it's certainly our belief that it will take much longer than the 1st of January to have that outsourced provider in place.
Just on that, because it's this unproven structures that I've picked up on. Like it's not unproven.
It's there.
It is there. It does work. Absolutely. The evidence we've received is that it takes considerably longer to put it in, and the question is in relation to that length of time. I accept as a challenge, but the evidence this morning is that it's unproven. That is not the case. It is proven. It does work. It is in place in OECD countries. Absolutely, there are challenges with it. But it would be misrepresenting the situation to give evidence before the committee here to say that this approach is unproven. That is not the case. Am I not correct in relation to that? There
are certainly precedents, exactly. There are examples in other jurisdictions where this type of structure does work. Not overly common, but they do exist. And I believe it was the department did go to the Nordic countries to review that back in, I think, 2018, 2019, where the approach appears to have changed. The other thing I just wanted to touch on in some of your questions and pick up on Moya's points is a little bit on the gender pension gap, because obviously that's a particular issue for us. We issued a paper last year, which I believe the committee has been furnished with as well. Now, as we said in our opening statement, we don't expect that auto-enrolment is going to eradicate, mitigate the gender pension gap. What our contention is, we would not like to see auto-enrolment exacerbating the gender pension gap. And you've already touched on the point that the lack of flexibility, top-ups and clarity about the state credit, all of those things remain a challenge to be cleared up. In terms of the threshold, again, if I refer to the UK, there has been a recent report in the UK back end of last year, I think, which looked at the 10k threshold. And it was quite interesting from a gender perspective, because they did find, even for volunteering to opt in, for those below the threshold, there was more men than women who volunteered to opt in. And with a voluntary opt-in, the whole point of auto-enrolment is to leverage inertia, is to not have active engagement or active decisions made on the part of the individual. So we feel that it's kind of disadvantageous for those women who are working in part-time work or multiple part-time jobs, for example. We do know that the multiple part-time jobs, according to the general scheme, will be taken into account. We just don't know how that's going to work yet. But we'll see that as hopefully the work progresses and the full bill comes in as well. But certainly in the UK, with the 10k threshold, the report that we looked at, I think it was from Legal and General, set out that there was considerations to even move it down to 6k to try and include more women and more part-time workers. And
I'm not aware with the UK or the New Zealand system, but there's a significant difference in both the rate of payment of the state pension in the UK and the buying power of the state pension in the UK compared to here. And we even see all of us as members of the Oireachtas would be advocating here for UK retirees who are legally entitled under our means tested payment to a top up here, even though they've made a contributory pension in the UK, because of the inadequacy of the UK pension compared to the Irish pension. So there is a stark contrast in terms of the state pension provision here compared to the UK. Is that the same in New Zealand, or is it more comparable to the Irish system or the UK system in terms of the state pension? Now, I don't expect you to know that here this morning, but you might
be one I'll have to take away.
Come back to us on that, because the UK is not a good example in terms of the lower threshold. What I'm wondering is New Zealand a good example in relative to the rate of pay that's paid out in the state pension in New Zealand?
We can certainly
is it comparable to the Irish system.
We can certainly take that offline and double check that. But I think the important point is, as Moya said, making sure that the system is available for individuals to increase their own adequacy in retirement where they can do that. And the earlier you start into a pension, the extra years you have for investment growth, for compounded growth, does make a difference to the end. For example, topping up your pension at the start of the life of your pension and topping up when you're near retirement does have a significant difference, because you have all those years of investment growth in the meantime.